with Betty L. Leiby, Leiby, 6091 Brookhaven Lane, East Lansing, Michigan, 48823, phone 517-351-2518, and Helen J. Earley, Tuesday, June 19th, 1990, held at the Oldsmobile History Center, EDC North, 4000 North Grand River at Lansing, Michigan. One tape only, both sides complete. You tell me who you are, where you live, and we'll go from there.
All right. Well, I'm Betty Leiby. When I joined Oldsmobile back in 1951, I was Betty Gallinari, but I am now Betty Leiby, and I live at 6091 Brookhaven Lane, apartment 33 in East Lansing. 48823, and my telephone number is area code 517-351-2518. I joined Oldsmobile in 1951 in July and went into customer service. Ernie Stoppel and I think it was Cleese. I'm not sure of the name. I think it was Cleese.
Ernie Stoppel was in customer service?
He was, yes, at that time. And I wasn't in there very long because
what did you do in
purchasing? Well, we answered the complaints, and typed them out. I wasn't the one to do that. I was a new hire, and I typed basically.
Do you
Interesting
remember
work though, because of the complaints that would,
I was going to ask you, do you recall any of the type of complaints? What were people complaining about?
Well, the usual one part of the car wasn't functioning properly, and I can't that part I can't remember specifically. I know more about it when I worked for the general manager, because then they would call him and wanted to speak with him in particular, and they would voice their complaints to me. But this way, I wasn't on the phone with those complaints. I read a few letters and typed them and that type of thing. So I wasn't, that part is a little vague to me. I wasn't in there that long. I was promoted to purchasing to work for Earl Duke, who was a buyer. That was in the old building, Building 60. And as you came into the lobby, you went up several steps and into this very large room where around in the outer portion of it were the offices for the buyers. Abe Goosen was our purchasing director then, and Tom Darnton was his assistant. Earl Duke had 4 men working for him. Dick Hodge was one, Art Luters, Bob Stevens, wonderful men. When I came into the job, the girl who had been there had been ill. The files were terrible. And I had to come in on a Saturday and try to revamp them. And I worked very, very hard on that job. But there again, I wasn't in there long. I was promoted.
Was Duke a productive or non-productive buyer?
Productive buyer, as I recall. And
what items did he buy? Do you remember?
That's one. Isn't that funny? When you said to come in, I can't remember exactly what he bought. Excuse me, I wasn't in there that long in that particular job. I did a lot of typing for them, took dictation and typed and filed. And it was in 1952. You see, I went in in May of 52, and in November, I was promoted to replace Barbara Sangster, who had retired in production management. Floyd Burr, that was up in the executive suite at Building 60.
Now that was on the 3rd floor?
That was the top floor. That was our top floor, yes. And I shared an office with Janet Carlton, who worked for Tom Downey. And he was our general manufacturing manager. one of my jobs was to post the board in his office of the line rate for the cars, production, so he could glance up there and see them.
What
Every
was-
hour I would get a call and mark the rate of
Do you remember
production.
the average rate of production?
Five something, as I recall. I
Would it
can't,
be 5?
579 or something like that. I can't recall that. I'm real sorry about
Was
that.
that, what do you mean? There'd be
So many cars built in an hour.
in
you
an
see.
hour, so
Yeah.
there would be 5 cars,
Oh, no,
5.79
579
cars
built
built in an hour. Was that just at Lansing?
That
was
was our
that?
Lansing plant. That was our
Only.
Lansing plant only.
Did he also have, keep a record on the other assembly plants that were building?
Yes, well,
automobiles?
we had, Mr. Burr was, and his assistant was Vic Brown. I worked for the two gentlemen, and Mr. Burr was in charge of material control, tool and expense material stores, and scheduling. Don Schultz was in charge of scheduling, and Harold Blow was in charge of material control. And that was a busy office, believe me. And I posted the figures and did the work for them. Mr. Burr died on the way to work in 1958.
Oh, really?
Yes, he had just been down to the Ford Hospital for a physical, and it was a couple of days later, coming into work, he had a heart attack, and his car just ambled off on Michigan and Washington right into a store, and he was gone. A wonderful man he was. Now, Vic Brown was not promoted to his job, but Bob Cook came in from the plant to replace him. Robert J. Cook, he had been general superintendent of manufacturing in the plant, and that was in 1958.
What kind of a man was Mr. Cook to
Oh,
work
he's
with?
very intelligent. Well, they all were that I worked for. Mr. Cook knew exactly what he wanted, and we got along just beautifully. I think my forte in working was organization. I've always been able to organize a more efficient way of doing things. You know what I mean? I got an award for devising an easier way for our salary forms that would come through as a person would be promoted and where and what. Anyway, I got an award for that.
Was that through the suggestion plan?
Yes, it was. Yes, it was. And in 1956, I was made secretary of the Oldsmobile Girls Club as a secretary. And in 1958, when I worked for Mr. Cook, then I was the vice president of the Girls Club. My name changed to Leiby, from Betty Gallinari to Leiby in April of 65. So I was then Betty Leiby. But in 1959, when I worked for Mr. Cook, then I was president of the Girls Club. And that year, 1959 was quite a year, as I recall, because that was our Lansing centennial year, February through June of 1959. And because I was president of the Girls Club, I was a ticket chairman for our centennial ball, and I was on the Queen's Committee, where some of our girls were chosen to represent Oldsmobile as the Lansing Queen. On May 3rd of 1959, they had the History of Transportation Parade, and I had 22 girls. I had to choose them and get them in costume from our Oldsmobile Girls Club, and they rode in that Olds electric carryall in the parade on that day. It was a magnificent parade.
What was that Olds electric carryall?
Where it came from, it was Oldsmobiles, but they had 3 sections of this electric carryall, and the person driving the front, and seats in each one. And I think it had been used perhaps on tours through the plant or something. You know, the carryall where they'd sit and look, and it was
Oh,
very
yes.
nice. That was quite a parade, and they had so many people involved in that. Well, then when I worked for Mr. Cook, I worked from 58 with Mr. Cook until August 1st of 1964, when I was promoted. When I worked for Mr. Cook, I was a secretary steno. Then I was promoted 8/1/64 to secretary to work for Jack P. White, who was director of public relations. Jack White had been with WJR in Detroit. He was a marvelous public relations man, as you know. And we were, of course, in the new administration building at that time, and I was up in the executive suite. Up in that executive suite, we had Jack Wolfram, Bob Griffin, Russ Hansen, Tom Downey. No, yes. Was it Tom Downey? Oh, Bob Rollis was up there. Tom Downey wasn't. Tom Downey was deceased at that time. And Mr. Cook was up there. And he was general manufacturing management ultimately then. And Janet Carlton worked for him. A manager after Tom Downey died. Mr. Cook took over Tom Downey's job. But Mr. White left in 72 due to ill health, and Mr. Bennett replaced him as director of public relations. And on April 1st, 1974, Mr. Cook, well, in January 74, Mr. Cook was made general manager of Oldsmobile and vice president of the corporation. There was quite a succession of general managers there. It was Jack Wolfram, and he left and ultimately died. He was in the business on the outside for a while. Then it was Harold Metzel who came in. Mr. Metzel retired and went out to Arizona. John Belts came in, very aggressive, good general manager, and became ill and died. And then Howard Carroll came over from engineering. And when I worked for Mr. White as secretary, I typed their speeches. Metzel and Belts was interesting. And then when Howard Carroll was promoted, he went to the corporation as an executive vice president. Mr. Cook was promoted into the general manager's position and vice president of General Motors. Well, he asked for me, and I was thrilled. Janet and Jerry Radke, Janet Carroll and Jerry Radke had retired at that point. And so on April 1st, 1974, I was promoted to that administrative secretary to work for Mr. Cook. And we had these marvelous offices up on the 6th floor. And up on that floor, the executive suite, we had this beautiful conference room. I had, at that point, working in there, that's where I would get the calls from customers. A corporation as large as General Motors, or in a division like Oldsmobile, you're bound to get people who will have some little something wrong with their car. And we had a very large customer service department, and they're very efficient. But when they would call, they'd ask for the general manager. And of course, I wasn't going to put a customer through to Mr. Cook if he was so busy. He would be very happy to talk with the customer, but that never happened because he was generally in a conference. And then I would talk to them and listen to them and be kind to them. After all, if people have a complaint, you have to feel for them. And I put them through to customer service, and I said if they weren't happy, I'm sure that we would be glad to talk with them again, and I had them talk with Mr. Cook. But they always took care of the matter, you know. So
Who was head of customer service then, do you recall?
He has since died, Ralph Hayes.
Oh, yes.
He has since died. And, you know, working there with all these wonderful men that had these executive jobs, to think that they have are deceased. I can just go right down a list and name them.
Name
Earl
some.
Duke died. Floyd Burr died. Vic Brown died. Jack White died. I worked for all those men. They're all dead. Tom Downey died. Harold Blow, who had been in charge of material control, died. Babe Corwin, remember Babe Corwin, traffic manager, is dead. Bob Rawlis, wonderful Bob Rawlis, general manufacturing manager, dead. Russ Hansen, dead. Bob Griffin, dead. Bob Mooney, Bob Dorshimer, chief engineer, remember? Ken Knight, Jim Maddox, all those men who contributed so much to the success of our division have all gone. And Mr. Cook is still living, fortunately, and he's doing well. And it was a wonderful place to work. I retired March 1st, 1982, after 30 years. I never dreamed I would be there that long, but that's the way it went. And the people I worked with were delightful. I never could complain about that. People were cooperative, and it was a fascinating place. I had when I was administrative secretary, I had a parking place down in the administrative garage, which was very nice. And there were a lot of conferences and a lot of nice things that happened.
Tell us about some of the conferences.
Well, we had on every subject, really.
Did you organize them? How
Well,
did you
no,
work with
I
them?
arranged the room very often if they
And where
wanted to
would
use
that
the
be?
room. And that was right next to my office, more or less, just across the hall from my office. And it's a large room, very large, beautiful table with all the chairs around. And they would ask if they could have the conference room at a given time. Our executive, like Bob Mooney, would like to conduct a meeting, or Jim Maddox. But we had our staff meetings once a week, and there Mr. Cook conducted those, and we had all our staff people in there attending. And the subject matter, of course, was on every subject conceivable that would pertain to cars, I presume. But things have changed so much. And when I left, Helen Holwig replaced me, and then we went into the computer era. I did not have a computer at my desk, and they do now everywhere. Everything's computer. I wish, in a way, that I had remained a couple more years so that I could have been involved with computers. Interesting. We had all excellent typewriters, excellent equipment, certainly to work with, but not computers. We were not in the computerized stage at that point. But
Well, Betty, do you remember any of the type of complaints when you were working for, say, Mr. Cook, for instance, or earlier in the general manager secretary position? What type of thing did people have a problem with on the automobiles?
Well, they would have trouble with the engine. Sometimes would be the engine, there stalling, or something to do with the braking, or the windows, perhaps.
It would rattle or wouldn't rattle?
Wouldn't go up or down properly, or
were these electric windows?
Yes, so in most cases that would be the case, and or the fittings, perhaps maybe something was off in the way that the upholstery came together, and they were quite angry with a lot of dealers. Very often they weren't happy with their dealer, the service. I think that would be the number one complaint, was service. The service was not to their
dealer.
Yes, that's right. Maybe an individual in a dealership wouldn't treat them just right. Maybe the next fellow would have been ideal, but maybe that particular one, and they weren't getting the satisfaction, so immediately they'd call and want some satisfaction. And our customer service people, of course, would get in touch with the dealership, and we had letters of thank you for your help type thing, and that keeps the customers.
Mm-hmm. Do you remember many high mileage letters coming in?
Oh yes, there were cars with considerable miles.
Do you remember what would be
100
the
and-
top?
100 and some thousands, that for driving, and people that have driven an Old Faithful like that, they're reluctant to part with them, aren't they?
Mm-hmm.
It's and then if they, of course, buy a new car and there's just the slightest thing wrong, right away. Sometimes it's just minor. It doesn't take much to correct it, in a new car, and then that can happen. And it's there's no problem there. It's just when you're thinking of production lines, you have to realize that an error can be made. No one's perfect, maybe some fellow on the production line forgets to put a little nut on the thing or something. It would happen that would be minor, but it would create a problem and could be easily corrected. But we had, we didn't have, I registered all of the complaints in a book, and we wrote, and then of course another thing, we had, Mr. Cook sent letters to people that had worked there 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, it was a nice thing. I received my ring, and I understand they aren't giving these any longer, but I treasure this ring. I love it. It's,
When you were working for Mr. Cook and he was production manager, do you remember any problems in the plant that he would have to deal with directly?
well, there were occasional problems. Everything was geared in with the manufacturing, yes, and scheduling and that type of thing. Gauging schedules. It was, he was good at that. He had been in the plant in a manufacturing capacity, and he knew about it. And I can't remember specifically things. I'm sorry, it's so long ago. It seems that when you retire your memory also, I think. But it was all my work for these men. It was interesting. I was never bored, despite the fact that it was a manufacturing end of it, the manufacturing end of it, or the buying end of it. Of course, public relations has more excitement to it, but
Now, what about your experience with Jack White?
he was, putting out the bulletins and that type of thing.
Now, what bulletins?
Well, on public relations, and with. Well, you work in public relations,
Bulletins on the new cars, is what you're
Yes,
saying?
that's right, and the shows.
In the news media
we covered the news media, and
I see.
and we had these wonderful, sales worked with the shows, but they put out beautiful announcement shows and had great attendance at those, and they had them in different parts of the country, where they displayed the new cars and Mr. White worked with all that too, to announce them, as you say, the media, talk to the media. As I say, he was with WJR in Detroit. And,
He was a good writer.
excellent writer.
Did he write speeches for other people to give?
Yes, very often he did. Yes. I typed many speeches, yes. And he wrote speeches for our general managers on occasion too.
That was standard
Yes,
practice.
that's part of the work.
The PR
You
work
bet. That was his.
to aid the general
You
manager
bet,
in
and
that
aid
way.
in that way.
Well, would the general manager tell him what he had in mind?
I
He wanted
think,
to stay?
yes, I'm sure he did. Or if Mr. White originated it, they would discuss it and maybe make a few changes, whatever, if he hadn't covered some phase of it that he wanted covered. But
No, you didn't actually work for Wolfram.
never.
That
I
was-
know, though, when I was president of the girls' club, he liked theater. He liked the theater. He liked the media. He liked the new shows, the car showings. David Nachtel and Evelyn Nachtel, his daughter, were connected really with the theater and music, and and he liked that. And when I was president of the Girls Club, it was the first time we put on a play, and I never dreamed have a lead in it, but I did. I was Ruth and my sister Eileen, and Rex Sessions directed that play. I remember I was nervous because here Mr. Wolfram attended, of course. He thought that was great that we'd put on a play, the girls. And it was quite successful, I guess. And he came and he was just, he didn't make a point of stopping and visiting with anyone in the executive suite too often. He would say hello and nod. But he came right into the office and said how much he enjoyed that play. I was quite pleased. And Mr. Wolfram studied very hard to make speeches. He wanted to be perfection on speeches.
It didn't come easy for him.
It did not come easy. I remember when he first got up there to speak, the knees were knocking. I sat in a spot where I knew he was nervous about that, but he worked diligently with that, and he became quite a speaker. He really worked at it. And Irma Norton worked for him, and she has since died.
Another
One in Vi. Carol worked for our director of sales. She died. A lot of the Oldsmobile lights have gone.
Well, now you and Janet were in the same office.
We shared an office. Yes, I worked for, they say, Floyd Burr and Vic Brown on one side, and Janet worked for Tom Downey. And then, of course, when Mr. Cook came in, he replaced Mr. Burr, and we shared that office together. And then when Mr. Cook, and then of course I went to work for Jack White, and then when Mr. Cook became general manufacturing manager replacing Tom Downey, Janet went with him there. That was in the new building. Those were beautiful offices. We had Seward Van Ness was up there, and
what was his title?
He was purchasing, head purchasing. And Bob Rollis was up there. And Ken Knight. And of course Jack White. And Mr. Cook.
Was Ray Federer up there?
And Ray Federer, yes. That's right, Ray Federer.
Mm-hmm. What was Federer's title?
He was in production. He was working with production scheduling and that type of thing up there. As I recall, yes, I think that's what he was working with. He was not a staff head per se, and Mr. Federer was not.
Was Mr. Knight?
No, neither of those were, but Rollis and Van Ness were. Van Ness. Mm-hmm.
Well, who worked for Van Ness?
Irene Hunt worked for Mr. Van Ness.
Mm-hmm. And who worked for Federer?
And for Federer, now Iva Dina worked for Ken Knight, and I'm trying to think who worked for Federer. Isn't that something? I cannot remember who worked for Federer. Do you remember?
I was thinking it could have been Irene Hunt.
No. She never did. No. She worked for Van Ness, and then Almquist. Remember, Almquist came up there when Mr. Van Ness left, and Merrill Almquist came in. She worked for him.
Well, Betty, now on the vacation, how did you girls manage the vacations?
Well, we
you subbed for
would have someone sit in and take over when we were away or answer the phone
but
or whatever.
It would be in your own group.
Yes,
from the outside.
From our own group,
I see.
Most of the time, yes. I think they've changed that to some extent now, where they give the girls a chance to learn in the other.
Yes, which maybe offers them a
gives an opportunity to be promoted into a better position,
Oh, what kind of a man was Floyd Burr to work with?
Oh, he was just the sweetest man. He was so kind and had a sense of humor, very subtle, and he was very knowledgeable. He walked slow, he talked slow. Mrs. Burr was very nice too, and he had a son who was a doctor. Now, Mrs. Burr is deceased too, I understand. It's a shame. Mr. Brown, Vic Brown, I think was crushed when he was not promoted to succeed Mr. Burr. And
Now, Burr at that time was,
production manager. And
And
Mr. Brown
Brown
was assistant
was the
production
assistant.
manager.
but instead they brought in,
They brought in Mr. Cook.
I see.
Yes. Well, I think the job warranted someone with manufacturing background, as Mr. Cook had out in the plant. He had been chief inspector at one time out there too, and he knew the plant thoroughly, as did Tom Downey. Tom Downey was a very knowledgeable man of the plant, and he was very well thought of. The men liked him, you know. He was kind of rough and ready type of man.
Well, what was Vic Brown's background then?
He didn't, I guess he'd been in the plant, but not in that capacity, so that his background wasn't as rounded as for that particular job as for Mr. Cook's or Mr. Burr, I should say. And
So Brown continued as
he
cook
continued as,
assistant.
yes, and I think it bothered him. So when he left, I had some letters from him, you
Had
know.
he retired?
Yes, because of ill health. And he'd been going to the hospital and different things, and we thought perhaps he would be on the mend. Mrs. White was concerned, of course, there, and the boys. And then he died. It was so unfortunate.
He didn't die, he passed away right away though, did he?
No, he was out. No, that's why I say I had letters from him. He had mentioned going to the hospital and all, and he thought he was on the mend. It was cancer. And
Then Mr. Bennett's.
Mr. Bennett's replaced him. Mr. Bennett's is a gung ho type of person. Mr. Bennett's had a way with people that made them feel good no matter what. He had an uplifting type of mannerism, you know, and people very well liked, outgoing, and I didn't work for him too long because then Mr. Cook was made general manager, and yes, general manager, and I went in to work for him. So I didn't work for Mr. Bennett very long, but he liked public relations. He had been in public relations. He had been Mr. White's assistant, so he had been in it a long time. And you worked for Mr. Bennett yourself. The assistant to public relations, that office was just below on the fifth floor. So there was up and down the stairs or on the elevator a lot, you know, Mr. Bennett's to Mr. White and so forth. I'm trying to think of some things that might be important to a history, but people, I remember people
are important.
Oh, yes, and they
Personalities.
contributed so very much to the whole overall picture. And we've lost so many of them. That's the sad part of it.
Well, Betty, do you remember GM executives visiting Oldsmobile?
Yes, I do. I remember the men coming in, and some of them were so gracious. They'd come up and shake your hand and
Now,
speak.
do you remember names?
Isn't that something that can you turn that off for a minute? I'll try to think of it. And, do you remember?
DeLorean had a child?
No, not DeLorean. There was another one, and that's the one I'm groping for, his name. And, well, anyway.
Was it a son or a daughter? What purchasing?
A daughter was hired in to work in purchasing.
He was the GM vice president?
Yes, he
I
was.
see.
But DeLorean did come in, and of all the big men from the corporation who came in, he was the least friendly. quite uppity. As a matter of fact, I was working in public relations at the time. He was a good-looking man, tall, good-looking man. But the others, when I was working for Mr. Cook, they would come in, they'd shake your hand, ask how you were. They're very, very, very nice people. I remember Gene Coos at the corporation, executive secretary at the General Motors,
Who did she work
invited
for?
me down, and she worked for the man, I can't think of his name, isn't that awful?
Okay.
And he was right up there in the executive suite at the corporation, and she had some of the gals, some of the general managers, secretaries into Detroit for luncheon. We had a delightful time. And she came to my retirement party, as a matter of fact, at the RE Old Museum.
Oh, yes.
But my contacts with the girls, it was always so pleasant, and they were always so nice to work with. And I'm just terribly sorry I can't think of that man's name, and he was such a nice.
Well, it might come later.
Later.
Do you remember any unusual circumstances happening at the plant that would involve either the PR director or the general manager?
Isn't that something that I can't? I'm sure there were episodes there, but nothing that was earth-shattering that I can recall. I really can't. I don't think I have any more to offer. I guess I can't remember the details. As I say, when I retired, I think I retired my memory.
Now, Janet Carlton, you worked in the same office with her, and your work was sort
Well,
of
that's when in public,
intermingled for a while.
Oh, yes, that's true. Yes, that's true. And we, all the promotions that came through for people who worked under our bosses came through our offices, and we had to keep records and so forth.
So actually, you maintained a set of manufacturing and production personnel records.
Oh, yes,
right
we
in
had
your
to.
office.
Yes, we had to, and all the reviews that the people had to
Personnel.
be signed by the general, by the head man, and so they came up through us. So we had access to all the confidential material. In every job I had, there was a certain amount of confidential material, and not so much maybe in the first two jobs, in customer service or in purchasing, but from there on in, from any time I got into the executive end of it, there was a lot of confidential material that you just did not, you kept to yourself.
Like information, you would know something.
That's right.
Was going to happen and when.
That's right, and about people and all. So you had all that to keep to yourself, of course. And the interviews were always scheduled through our office. And they had to have an interview on occasion for their file.
Well, Betty, when you were working in purchasing, that was just 2 or 3 months?
Well, yes, it was close to a year. Tom
see.
Darn recommended that I be promoted up there
Now,
because I had typed, when I first got in there, I was just typing a lot and
What kind of
fast.
things did you type?
Well, letters and all, they had letters to send out, and I had lots, and I had the 4 men and Earl Duke, and so I was just pounding the typewriter like mad. And the poor girl who had been in there, as I said before, was just ill, I think, and could not, they had to release her, was the whole thing, because it was just the place
Do you
would fall
remember who
apart.
that was?
Can't remember, no, I can't remember the name.
Now, Darvin was the director of purchasing?
No, Abe Goosen was, and he was an assistant.
And
Now, an interesting thing happened. I came to Oldsmobile from Duotherm. I worked for Lou Vandertil. I was hired off the street to work for the advertising manager, and that's right. And Bruce York was the assistant to Lou Vandertil at Duotherm. They hired me to work for Lou Vandertil. Well, the secretary who worked for Bruce York was never happy about that. She felt she should have that, and it was unnerving to a point. so I worked there quite a long time, and then I chanced to check Oldsmobile for employment. I supported my mother and 2 children at the time. Money was important to me, and so I did. I was hired right in through, he has since died, Matt Campbell. Yes, and Harold Cutler has since died. But but it was, Harold Cutler didn't become a personnel director until Mr. Mahoney had retired. So anyway, when I worked in purchasing, I got a call from Lou Vandertil, who had been promoted from duotherm to motor wheel. He called and wanted me to, he said he had that new job as a vice president. He wanted me to come over and be a secretary. So I went into Mr. Duke and told him there's more money to me, and it meant something. And Mr. Duke got right up, left the office. I thought, well, I guess he doesn't care. And he came back and he said, come in. And he had gone into Abe Houston's office and said, she's had this offer, more money. He must have said, I don't want to lose her, because he said, we're going to equal that money.
Do you remember what you were earning?
It wasn't much in those days, you know.
No, but do you remember the amount?
The amount, well, it was 200 and something, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And so they equaled that. It wasn't anything out of line, you know, but it was an immediate increase in salary. So I, of course, called Mr. Vandertil back. I said, I guess maybe I'm going to stay. They have equaled the salary that you've offered. He said, oh, well, he said, that was, I think that's nice for you. He said, I can't do any more about that right now. I said, well, frankly, I now that I'm here and they've done this for me, I guess I'll stay, but thank you very much. And I said, you helped me considerably, really. So anyway, it was in my favor.
So you were about a year in purchasing.
About a year in purchasing, and then, as I say, I was interviewed up for work for Mr. Burr and got the job. So I really, my first couple of years were just, customer service and purchasing, and the people were also nice at purchasing. I remember Clayton Denier used to be you remember him? He used to sit over in the corner office, and he always wore a hat. He was a steel buyer.
Mm-hmm.
I remember Clayton here, and the different, and so many of those men are deceased now too. That were in purchasing.
Well, did you have a chance to meet the different vendors who were coming in, and
only as they pertain to our particular.
And you don't remember what your boss bought?
Isn't that awful? But I can't remember what he bought. And my goodness, and typed so many letters and everything. Isn't that awful? But as I say, I worked with those files. You never saw such a garbled up mess of files in your life. Oh, dear me. I came in one Saturday and just had things strung out from one end to the other trying to get them organized. And that poor girl. So I can see why he was happy he had someone in who could find these files.
Mm-hmm.
But Mr. Duke was an easygoing and nice man. He was very nice to work for, and of course we had some good men working for him too. Dick Hodge is now with the corporation. He went to the corporation, and Art Luters is, of course, long since retired, but he always worked with antiques and different things. Fine man and very intelligent. And Bob Stevens went on with the corporation, and I don't know where. And there was one other man, I can't remember his name. And he came in later, replacing someone else. But anyway, it's we had Joe Vermetti was in purchasing, and a lot of them have, of course, aren't there.
What was his title?
Well, Madeline Beale worked for him, and I can't remember his exact title. He was a buyer.
Mm-hmm.
It's a buyer.
You don't recall
I
what
can't
he bought?
recall any of the
That,
anyone bought except the steel buyer. Isn't that funny? That sticks in my mind.
Mm-hmm.
But
did they have a buyer like Lou Russo for a while?
well,
at that time?
yes. Well, I don't remember Lou Russo in purchasing per se at that time in that
No.
spot.
I mean, did he have a buyer then who handled
yes,
that
of
type
course,
of?
of course,
Who
of
was
course.
that, like
And I
the
can't,
stationery and the sales type
And
items?
isn't that something, I can't remember who that was, exactly. But,
Okay, that's all right.
I know that, in those days with the, girls club, we worked with Dale Bovee over in, personnel. We had a lot of functions in those days. They were very interesting. Everyone was so interested
What
in
kind of functions, Benny?
participating. Well, we'd have golf outings, and we'd have. The year I was president, we had a couple of trips. We had a New York weekend, and went down to Greenfield Village. That's the first travel we had. But we'd go to Gull Lake. We had special picnics and outings like that.
Now, these were all planned through the Oldsmobile Recreation Department?
No, they were planned through the Oldsmobile Girls
Girls
Club in
Club.
conjunction with that.
With the
Yes,
Recreation Department?
yeah,
Okay.
it was and with that type of thing going on and your work, well, you never
You're busy.
neglected your work. You were busy. You were busy all the
Well,
time.
being an officer, it must have taken some time out of your own job
Well,
to attend meetings.
We tried to avoid
Schedule
being
around.
scheduled around that. Yes, we
Mhm.
did. And of course, when we put on the play, of course, it was in the evening. We rehearsed and all. We had a lot of our Oldsmobileites in it, and it was from different areas. For my sister Eileen, there were quite a cast in there. Dale Bovee was in it, and Bob Waters, who was since deceased. And one Christmas, we put on Mr. Bennett's narrated it one Christmas, and we were all dressed up in old, in early American costumes, with the long flowing gowns and everything. And it was a family scene, and he narrated the Christmas story. And when he would stop, we'd all have to stop right where we were. And then he would go on, and it was quite interesting.
Now, was that in the auditorium?
Yes,
in
it was.
Building
All these
64?
were always in the auditorium, our plays and all. Our play, we put on more than one night, there were 2 or 3 nights we had the play. They had subsequent plays after I was no longer president, and then the following year, they Can't Take It With You, they did, and those were good days for camaraderie, there was a warmth and an association that we had, and I don't know that is quite the case now.
Mhm.
I think that some of it is gone.
Well, you also had bowling.
Oh,
and,
yes, you had
leagues
with
and
different bowling leagues
golfing.
and golfing leagues, and we were involved in a lot of things.
The girls' club was really a very
active
club.
Yes, it was. 500 and some girls participated.
Now, was that just?
And we had style shows galore.
Mm.
I was in charge of 2 or 3 style shows. We had a lot of fun with that.
Was that restricted just to salaried girls?
Yes, it was. Mm-hmm. It was Oldsmobile Girls Club salaried.
I see.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And we had, and some of them had their children model. And we had a good time with that. So, can't think of anything more to tell you, Helen. Sorry.
Betty, what about Phelps? Did you work closely with him?
Well, I typed the
Any
speeches. He was a dynamic person. I think if he had lived, he would have been at the corporation. Certainly, the corporation is well represented by Oldsmobile people. Howard Carroll went there, and look at Bob Stempel as our new president, and Bob Schultz is there, and Pete Estes from Oldsmobile is there, and so many moved right along. We had good executive material at Oldsmobile. That was quite obvious. And
So you typed Beltz's speeches.
yes, typed many of his speeches,
Mm-hmm.
and
Did he
and,
write his own?
well, as I say, Jack White,
I
and
would.
I think Belts probably did a lot of his own too, because he knew what he wanted to say, and he was good on the podium. I can tell you, he spoke well.
Mm-hmm.
Was a good speaker, and he was dynamic.
What about Howard Carroll?
Very intelligent man. Um, he was quiet, very reserved man. But if you saw him out in the street and you knew, he'd say hello, and very pleasant. I did pass him on the street one time, and he remembered me. My association was type the speeches for him, say hello over there by the elevator or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And nice looking man, and he went to the corporation.
Do you remember, Betty, when they first began to let girls drive company cars?
I don't remember that because, well, Lynn Myers had one.
But she was a staff head.
Yes, well, she wasn't per se a staff head, but she was in an executive position, but not a
Mhm.
staff head. Um,
But I mean, girls like now, we are
yes,
able to.
yes. But I don't think I think they have cut back on that to some extent on company cars, from what I've heard.
Perhaps so.
Yes.
But I was just.
And I can't remember the date when they actually started to allow. Yes, the policy did change. And there weren't too many that had them. I can't even recall, other than Lynn Myers.
Well, but I mean, just a little short run.
Oh, yes.
Borrow a car.
Oh, yes.
Some business assignment.
Oh, yes. Now, I, on occasion, had a courtesy car on a trip. Now, here was an interesting thing. When I took a trip back to Germany, we flew over and I picked up a car in Holland. Courtesy car.
Nice.
Through General Motors.
Mm-hmm.
It was very interesting.
Now, what year was that?
Back in I think it was in the 60s, about 68 or thereabouts. I'm trying to think.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, probably around there. But I went back to Germany and tried to retrace my steps. Went into Belgium and Holland and Germany. And drove around and met the men there at the dealership in Holland. The funny thing is, the little car I had, we were in a hurry. We had to make time, and I got in the car and it was raining cats and dogs. I couldn't find that windshield wiper, and the gal who was traveling with me, we pushed every button in the car, and finally I looked and our trunk was up in the driving rain. I had to pull into a gas station and go to show him that I wanted the windshield wiper, and he pushed the right button. Wasn't that we knew nothing about that car when we started, so that's not. And they drive so fast over there, and I'm not a slow driver, but if you're on the Autobahn, if you're going 90, they pass you. They'll come up behind put the lights on and off, and that means move over. Generally, it was a Mercedes or something that was passing it. But it was quite an experience. But it was nice on the courtesy cars. In public relations, we very often granted the use of cars to particular people, executives, and we'd make arrangements for them. And they'd go through public relations very often for that.
Like what kind of people?
Oh, from the corporation, or an executive going somewhere, or perhaps the head of an organization in Lansing that needed a car.
Mm-hmm.
They would in monies arrangement for monies and earn services for them through public relations, and there was a lot that they did. Public relations did, and that helped our public relations.
Mm-hmm.
We had letters of thank you, for the services rendered, and wish my memory served me better on specific instances, names.
Well, it's doing real well. Now, did you work with Irma Norton at all?
No, not particularly. Hello and say hello.
Mhm.
Irma kept pretty much in her office and worked with Mr. Wolfram.
And he was pretty close
Oh, yes,
too.
yes, he was. As I said, it was quite a thrill to have him walk in my office and say, I enjoyed that play. You did a good job. He was he kept to himself very definitely. We'd walk in the executive suite, walk through, go into his office. He never seemed to visit in with the men in their offices. He went into his office pretty much.
Let's see.
That
He had a staff head meeting every week or every morning, or did he have
he would
schedule?
have, well, Mr. Wolfram was in the old building in 60, and the conference room was in his office area. So they would go in there.
I see.
The men would come up.
Like when he would call them individually, or
Well,
was
and
there a
I
set
think
schedule?
there was a set schedule. Always had staff meetings. That would be always the case, at least once a week for your staff heads to organize and plan. And that was the case with all the general managers, the weekly staff meeting. And other meetings if they felt necessary.
Well, Betty, were you there when Baker served the few weeks that he was there?
Yes, but you hardly got to know the man. He was there such a short time. That was so sad.
He was just in for a few days.
Yes, really. That was so unexpected, I never dreamed that man would be gone that fast.
No.
And John Belts lost weight so rapidly. His suit just hung on him there at the last time I saw him. For the last time he gave a speech to the Oldsmobile Girls Club, as a matter of fact. I remember that. Of course, I'd see him in the executive suite, but you could just see it, the weight loss as it took place there.
Metzel, did you work closely with him?
Well, I saw Mr. Metzel, and I think I typed a couple speeches there for Mr. Metzel, too.
Did he do any of his own writing?
I think he did some of it. I think in all cases, it was a case of collaboration with the Director of Public Relations, where they worked out what they were going to say and together. But in the final analysis, it was the Director of Public Relations who put it on the paper, pretty much, I would say. And there isn't much more that I can
You can't
cover.
think of anything that you'd
anything
like to share with us?
No,
about
I can't really think of
any
anything at this point.
processes or methods? Now, you went through the stage of typing carbon copies, and then the first step in the
Yes, and we put it
Was it-
on yellow paper and larger print and
now the carbon copy was yellow, as you're saying?
well, the one they used.
Oh, you're talking about the
original,
speeches?
The speeches. Oh, yes.
Okay,
yes.
that was on a
On the yellow
heavier
paper. Yes.
paper
Yes, and
with a larger type
larger
of
type.
bulletin type.
Mr. White liked the way I don't think I would have been typing those speeches per se. If he liked the way he always liked that because I put a dash and, for the pause and wasn't just a lot of words together so that you could look up and then find your place when you look down again.
And you wouldn't break a sentence at the end of a page
oh, no,
or a
nothing like
paragraph.
that. No,
even.
it just, if I had to give a speech and I looked up and down, I'd certainly want to have it in some kind of form where I wouldn't have a problem with it, delivering it.
Did you ever work with what they called a teleprompter,
No,
typing on that.
no, I never did.
see.
Never did. I guess they've had teleprompters in the past. I'm not sure
Vic
how.
Sutherland had
Yes, I
those,
think so.
remember.
And Lane had those when he gave a speech at the college. I remember for the shows, when we went to the shows, he had the teleprompter.
I see. Well, what about Mr. Lane? Did you work with him at all?
No, no, I never did. Never worked with Mr. Lane. He wasn't in that capacity actually when I retired. As I recall,
You were working for Cook then?
I was working for Cook, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And Jim Maddox was head of sales at the
Right.
time, his director of sales. Howard and Bill Lane was working for Jim Maddox, but not he was not general sales manager.
Mm-hmm.
And Bob, I'm trying to think of his name. So hard and difficult to remember all the names, but so many have gone. So many have deceased. Bob Jarbo was a wonderful group selling man, and he did so much. I went to his retirement party. Was very well thought of in the field. Worked
Very capable.
very capable man. Worked with him on sales,
Now, did he-
promotions, and shows and things.
So he must have worked with the general managers pretty closely too.
Well, yes, he worked with PR.
Mhm. What about Jerry Radke?
Yeah,
She must have
had
been
her.
a help to you in learning the ropes in some
Well,
areas
Jerry
too.
had departed before I became
Oh, yes.
secretary.
So the person that you learned from,
Well, I guess I actually replaced her when you come to
Yes,
think.
I was
Yes, I did
thinking.
replace her, yes, but I just, it was just, she was here today and gone tomorrow type thing. So it wasn't there wasn't too much learning time in that, for that job. But she worked for general managers all the way
Good
through, as I
many
recall.
years.
Yes, she certainly did. She worked for Metzel and all of them.
mm-hmm.
Wolfram.
Yeah, she had quite a string of them
Yeah.
there.
Irma Norton worked for Mr. Wolfram. She worked for Mr. Skinner prior to that.
That must have been after Betty Hemmer.
Yes, that Hemmer. Yeah, was it Hemmer or Hemler?
Hemmer.
Hemmer. It was Hemmer. Yes, and
Hemmer.
she was an aunt, Dick Hodges' aunt.
Oh,
Betty
yeah.
Hemmer was. He was one of the fellows who worked for Earl Duke. I knew Dick Hodges.
Betty, do you remember when the policy changed from not hiring married women, or if you were married, you were laid off, to hiring married women?
I don't
Did they?
know that. Really, I don't recall
I
that.
was just thinking perhaps you
Yeah.
might see something in the personnel records you kept when you were in production.
No, I don't remember